you. Well, thank you for allowing me to come back. I always enjoy coming here and sharing with you guys. Just a little bit of a review. In August of 2015, I began working at Mbingo Baptist Hospital in Cameroon, training young African doctors to be surgeons. I'm a missionary with SIM, and I work with the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons, and I'll call that PACS. Now, Cameroon is just to the right of Nigeria. Here's Cameroon right there in West Central Africa. And Cameroon is divided into the French-speaking eastern part and the English-speaking western part. And you see the red dot there? That's about where Mbingo is. It's in a rural area. It's just way out in the sticks. It started as a leprosy treatment center, but is now a 300-bed hospital run by the Cameroon Baptist Convention. This is a wing of the surgical ward, and people come from all over Cameroon to get care. And when I'm at Mbingo, I serve as faculty surgeon with the PACS surgical training program. Now, PACS was started to address the critical need for surgery in Africa. It used to be thought in missions that we should just be focusing on clean water, public health, and nutrition, and things like that. But the Lancet Commission on Global Surgery changed some of that thinking. In this map, the darker the red, the worse the access to surgery for the people. And in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, close to 100% of the people have trouble accessing surgery. There were 5 findings of the Lancet Commission, but I want you to remember that about 5 billion people in the world lack access to safe and affordable surgery and anesthesia care. And the health burden of surgical need was found to outstrip the need for malaria care, tuberculosis care, and HIV care combined. It was also found that the lack of surgical care inhibits the economic growth of nations. To translate this into raw numbers, 56 million people in sub-Saharan Africa can't get care when they need it. And that's about 93% of the people. They lack access to basic surgical anesthesia and obstetric care that's safe, timely, and affordable. The World Health Organization recommends there be 1 surgeon for every 20,000 people. But in Africa, some places only have 1 surgeon for 250,000 people. And then you have South Sudan, 1 surgeon for every 2.5 million people. New York State and Malawi have about the same number of people, about 20 million people. New York has over 2,000 surgeons. Well, Malawi has 42. To meet that basic standard set by the WHO, they need over 1,000 more. And 10% of deaths in Africa can be avoided by surgical intervention, and 20% of deaths in kids. Only 5 to 10% of women can get a C-section if needed. And that's a pretty horrific thing to think about in 2024. So PAC's mission statement is to glorify God by training and discipling African surgeons and related specialists to become Christ-like leaders and servants, providing excellent and compassionate care to those most in need. And PACS envisions a growing number of African surgeons and related specialists living out the gospel and ministering to the sick. So PACS is not just a surgical training program, it's a discipleship program. PACS has programs in 12 countries in Africa, and there are 26 separate training programs. 15 of them in general surgery, and that's what I'm in. I'm a general surgeon. But now there are programs in orthopedic surgery, pediatric surgery, heart surgery, head and neck surgery, neurosurgery, OBGYN, and also anesthesia. There are 20 partner hospitals, mission hospitals, and there's Mbingo right there. And there are 172 residents and fellows in training, and 1/5 of them are women. These trainees represent 19 African countries, and there are 156 graduates out there serving in 23 different countries in Africa. Now, they're required to work for 5 years in an area where they will serve the poor, but almost all of them have continued to do that after their 5-year obligation period. Now, some of you may remember that that I was unable to return to Mbingo because of the worsening of the Civil War, and then COVID came along, and then Mom's health worsened a little bit, so I needed to stay near her. And the PACS program at Mbingo was suspended for a year because of the Civil War. So SIM gave me a job working in the U.S. so I could be near Mom. And Mom is actually right back there. She will be 94 in May. Yeah. So part of my job is to represent SIM at job fairs at local universities, and this is at Oregon State, my alma mater. Here I'm talking to an engineering student down in Klamath Falls at Oregon Tech. And the believing students are both stunned and encouraged to see a booth from a mission organization like SIM there. And I have multiple interesting conversations. And for those who are interested, I keep some materials from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association on my table. It's a joy to attend mission conferences for SIM. This is Missions Fest Seattle. And this is the SIM booth at the Global Missions Health Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. And between 3,000 and 4,000 healthcare students and workers from around the U.S. come there every year to hear about missions opportunities in healthcare. Part of my job description is to continue my French studies, and I meet regularly with my French tutor in Salem. Georgette was from the Alsace region of France, and she's in her 80s, yet she graciously meets with me and tries to improve my French. She also always fixes me a delicious lunch, so we talk about food a lot. I also take classes for the Alliance Française in Portland, and I just finished one course, and then when spring term starts, I'm going to take another course this spring. Another project is to help write curriculum for the College of Surgeons of Southern, Eastern, and Central Africa. We call it COSEXA. And it's used by surgical residents in training throughout Africa. The Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland actually funded it, but PACS writes all the content. And then I've started working as project manager for a project with SIM that funds PACS missionary graduates working in unreached areas. And it's very difficult sometimes for African missionaries to raise their support. The African church is poor. Not all of them are on board with giving. So this project intends to provide a portion of their salary for the first 5 years on the mission field so they can get to the field quicker. And it gives them time to finish raising support, also helps the hospital who maybe can't afford them initially. And so right now we're in the process of reviewing applications and about ready to start interviews to select our first 2 participants in the program. Mom's health stabilized a bit, so last year I was able to take 4 short-term trips, 1 to Malawi, 1 to Kenya, and then 2 to Mbingo. And I just got back from Kenya in February. And while at Mbingo, I serve as surgical faculty. And here we are at morning report. Every morning we get together and talk about the patients who were admitted the previous 24 hours. And then we make patient rounds. This is a picture from patient rounds over 7 years ago. And all these young doctors here are working at mission hospitals throughout Africa. Dr. Sam Nigo is working at a very poor mission hospital in his home country of DR Congo. It was at the hospital where he was born, actually. And the hospital is in a war zone, doesn't have much equipment, and sometimes they don't always pay him. But he and his wife, Rose, could leave now because they fulfilled their obligation, but they stay there to serve their countrymen, even though he and Rose wonder how they're going to educate their 3 little boys. Dr. Tadfor is an internal medicine specialist, and she's working at a mission hospital with the Cameroon Baptist Convention. Dr. Trezor Mabanza is working at a large, very difficult government hospital in Liberia. And Dr. James Joseph is working at a small mission hospital near the coast of Kenya. And again, sometimes they don't pay him. In fact, if you read my prayer letter last month, he's the one that I featured. I brought him instruments from Salem Hospital. And there was a picture of him in my last prayer letter, of him and his family. So these are dedicated young doctors, and I'm privileged to have been part of their training. As I mentioned before, PACS is a discipleship program as much as it is a surgical training program. A lovely part of being in a bingo is participating in the weekly Bible study. And we follow the PACS 5-year spiritual curriculum. It's a discipleship program for training Christian leaders. And all these young doctors are going to be leaders in their future hospitals where they work. So it's a joy to be part of their training, both surgical and spiritual. And if you're curious what's in the spiritual curriculum, there are some resources back on the display table where you can look at that and see what's taught in that. And of course, I help the residents do surgery. But because of the Civil War, fewer patients have been able to make it to the hospital, so the caseload is lower. In fact, the last time I was there, I didn't go into surgery at all because I was so busy with the other classes I was teaching. Plus, if I would have taken a case, I would have taken a case away from a senior resident or a junior faculty member. Working with the residents is lovely. Here, some of them are writing their chart notes after morning rounds. And this is Dr. Roger. Now, we would say Roger, right? But he's now one of our chief residents. This is another chief resident back there, but he's one of our chief residents this year. He's ready to graduate, and he wants to stay on his faculty at Bingo, and he will do very well. But he was raised by his mother, and she is a subsistence farmer, and she somehow, with a little plot of land, was able to raise enough money to pay his medical school fees. And he heard about PACS when someone came and gave a presentation at his little church, and his pastor encouraged him to apply. So these young people will change their communities, and they'll transform Africa with the gospel. Several years ago, I developed a basic surgical skills course that I teach to our newest residents. I teach them essential skills, and I've taught it multiple times at Bingo and in other places as well. And teaching this course often means lots of shopping at Walmart and Home Depot, and then making stuff and then packing it. This is a typical load for me heading out of Portland. This is a picture from a course I taught in Malawi. And here, one of the young doctors is learning how to put on surgical gowns and gloves properly. This is actually Dr. Roger again as an intern. And here they're learning to tie surgical knots, and I like to use number 10 crochet thread from Walmart. Pig skin is very much like human skin, so we use pig's feet to learn how to sew up lacerations. And then we use the tendons from the pig's feet to learn how to do tendon repair. Now, a very popular part of the course is the laparoscopic session. The residents just love this. But the commercial trainers are expensive, so we use just plastic storage boxes from Walmart and then webcams and battery-powered lights I get on Amazon. They practice such things as threading pony beads on nails. Or here they're learning to close a zip tie, and this is really hard. And here they're transferring perler beads from one sauce cup to the other. And this resident is learning to examine intestine using a shoelace. He or she must go hand over hand, examining the shoelace from one end to the other, but only touch the red parts. In this exercise, the resident has to open the little matchbox there and take out the matches one by one, and then put them back in and close the matchbox. Well, this young intern from Ethiopia, this is at the Malamulu program in Malawi, decided to do something different. He spelled out Malamulu on the floor of his trainer. So I think he'll go pretty far. Another session is devoted to ultrasound, and all the residents learn how to check for shock and internal bleeding and blood clots in the leg. They also practice ultrasound-guided biopsy by using a bin full of cooked oatmeal in which I embed little potatoes. And finally, they spend one session learning how to sew intestine together, and they love this. Recently, I developed an optional workshop learning how to sew blood vessels together. Now, we don't do much vascular surgery in Africa, but the residents need to learn how to fix injuries. So here I'm making some models to simulate working in the space behind the knee. It's a confined space, and you can see the completed models behind me. We use the long, skinny balloons that are used to make balloon animals. And the first exercise is to just cut it in two and then sew it together end to end. And this is someone's first effort, which I think is pretty good. In the next exercise, they sew the blood vessels end to side, which is what you would do for a bypass. And here's Dr. Faith, one of our interns. You can see she's done a couple of end-to-side anastomoses, and she's finishing one. And it looks like she's got some sort of funny skin disease, but she doesn't. The package of long, skinny balloons comes with a sticker of eye stickers. And I told them for every anastomosis you do, you can have an eye sticker. So they stuck them all over their faces. Now, when they had succeeded on doing things out in the open, then they graduated to work in the model. Again, this simulates working in the confined space behind the knee on the popliteal artery. And it makes the task quite challenging, but much more realistic. I also provide breakfast and lunch during these sessions. I think it's important to feed people. And, Jesus did a lot of his teaching during meal times. Now, one stress of working at a bingo has been the lack of good anesthesia. Patients often have had serious complications both during and after surgery, and there have been many unnecessary deaths. But 2 anesthesiologists started working there, and that's really, really made a difference. And as part of improving the situation, I was asked to provide some teaching on advanced cardiac life support. Some of you may know that's what doctors and nurses do when a patient's heart stops in the hospital. And that was my focus for the last trip, my last trip to Mbingo. And here I am preparing for the course. I like things to be as realistic as possible, so I made some models. This is my defibrillator model. And if you push the left button, you'll hear my recorded voice saying, "Stand clear, analyzing rhythm, beep, 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 beep." And then if you push this one, you hear my recorded voice saying, "Stand clear, giving shock, beep." And then here is how they give the IV medications. This is a man's hand because there's no nail polish. And one of my intentions was that our young doctors would be able to teach this course in their future hospitals. Now, most mission hospitals in Africa don't have an airway mannequin, right? So I made one out of some simple materials and brought it, showing them they could make one there. This is made out of a foam wig head, which is very commonly found in Africa. And if you tilt the chin up like you're supposed to do, then it opens the airway, and then you can see the lungs can be inflated. The classes were well attended, and we trained 120 hospital workers, not just doctors and nurses, but other people as well. And they had to run life support scenarios just like you would here in the U.S. During an advanced cardiac life support course. Here you can see 3 members of the team doing CPR. He's doing this mannequin doesn't have a chest, so I made it out of just a square of foam and a pillowcase. And then these guys are timing the interventions, running the defibrillator, and drawing up medications. Having the models made it very realistic for them. Here you can see one team, they're standing back while one member of the team pushes the button to analyze the rhythm. And then they turn over a paper and they see what the rhythm is. A member of this team is giving epinephrine to a patient. These are the drugs they use, yellow water, red water, blue water. And their final exam was to run at least 2 unknown scenarios, but they were all so excited, every team ran 4 or more. And here one team member is trying to determine the cardiac rhythm, and the patient must not need CPR right now. So this is one of our critical care specialists, Dr. David Sunday, and my hope is they can run this in my absence. And this next slide has a video of the participants running their final scenarios. It's less than 2 minutes long, and you can see how engaged they are, giving medications and doing CPR and checking the rhythms and things like that. So I think you'll enjoy this. Awesome. He's checking the rhythm there, trying to figure out what to do next. So, and then this next video, this team just realized their patient survived. I don't think he looks so good. Anyway, so. Well, every month I host a dinner for the PACS family, for the PACS residents and faculty and their families. And this promotes fellowship among the PACS community and makes them feel like a family. Here are two of our PACS female residents and our ophthalmologist enjoying dinner. And here's one of our junior residents and our junior faculty enjoying dinner with their families. A highlight for the kids is I always bring my toy collection. This little boy here, dressed in his Sunday best, always goes for the same locomotive. But it's a joy to see the PACS families fellowship together. When I'm absent, they continue to meet, and they actually had their dinner this last Wednesday. And you guys fund this. They sent thanks. Thank you, Dr. Debbie, for funding this. Said, no, my supporters. Thank Jesus, and thank my supporters because you guys fund this. And they sent thanks. Said, say thank you to your supporters. So I'm saying thank you to you. So, but it's a joy to spend time with these young doctors and their families. Their Christian testimonies are inspiring. Many come from backgrounds of hardship. They will make disciples for Jesus in their culture. While it's so easy to just focus on the discouragements and the obstacles, I need to remember that the gospel is the power of God. It transforms people and societies. I can't always see Jesus, the results, but God is always working. And I need to remember that Jesus focused on 12 people, 3 really, and they changed the world. Dr. Sama is now our program director. Dr. Chokomeko is one of our faculty members. Now, if you've been reading my prayer letters, you know that there are multiple infrastructure projects going on in Bingo. This is the radiation machine that will be installed, and they're working on that. They also need to build 3 hostels so the patients have a place to stay. And Bingo has a hydroelectric project that now provides 24-hour water and electricity. This is the turbine, and it runs very well. This is Dr. Mark Snell, and he was our program director. He also supervised a lot of the infrastructure projects, but he had to return to the U.S. last year because of medical problems. A new oxygen plant has been completed, but it can't be used yet because there's rewiring that needs to be done in the hospital compound. Dr. Sama is our program director. All of our faculty are young, new, recent graduates, so pray for them. Pray for more seasoned faculty to come as missionaries and more short-term visitors to come because they provide specialty teaching. My most recent trip was marred by violence with multiple gunfights close to the hospital. Cameroonian soldiers are often on the compound. I spent one entire morning sitting on the floor of my bathroom because there was a gunfight 30 yards from my apartment. When I was there, the road was closed the entire time, making it difficult for patients to get to the hospital. And more recently, our administrator was arrested by the military government. He's been released, but the charges have not yet been dropped. And then the separatists threatened to burn down the hospital and kill all the leadership of the hospital. Things have improved, but there are still dark clouds hanging over the work there. So much prayer is needed. Because of the instability there and some changes in Mom's health, I decided not to return to Bingo this month as I had planned. So how can you be involved in reaching others? What should you be doing in missions? Well, we all have our marching orders from Jesus. He said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Charles Swindoll said, whatever we do, we must not treat the Great Commission like it's the Great Suggestion. We all need to be senders or goers or both. So what can you be doing? One of the most effective things we can do is pray. Jesus said, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. So please pray. I also like to say that doctors and nurses and pastors and teachers are a dime a dozen on the mission field. Of course, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but people who can do IT, finances, administration, human resources, who can fix things are like gold, and that's really true. Retirement is not a biblical concept. We should redeploy, not retire. We should all be involved as goers or senders or both, so pray about what you can be doing. I have some prayer requests on the back table if you'd like to look at them. You can sign up for my email list, and I'll be back there to answer questions at the end of the service. So I think, do we have time for questions? Okay. So does anyone have any questions?
I think I'll start us off with questions.
Okay.
And then I'll get up and hand the mic to anybody else that would like to ask the question. If the mic scares you, just raise your hand and say no, and then ask the question, and then I'll repeat it. But we'd like to be able to record the questions and the answers. I'm curious about the language, having grown up in a missionary family as well, and my parents had to learn German. So you're learning French because that's the primary language. I thought I heard some English in that surgery room model thing. And then I guess my question is, when are they speaking English? When are they speaking French? Is the curriculum in French? Is the Bible you're reading in French when you're doing the discipleship kind of work? I'm just curious about the language.
Some of our residents are francophone, but they all have to be good in English to be in PACS, because the curriculum's in English, all the teaching's in English, and we live in the hospital is in the English part of Cameroon, so everyone speaks English. But about 75% of our patients come from the francophone area, so it's important to be able to talk to some patients, and then we have to travel back and forth and be able to talk to officials and people on the road and shopkeepers and things like that. So it is primarily a French-speaking country, but we live in a little English enclave. So.
Does anybody else have any questions? Just raise your hand.
Yes.
I was curious what your plans are for the near future, where you're wanting to be. Is that something that you can share? Will you be back with the teaching, or will you be staying here in the States?
Okay, yeah, I'm right now, SIM has given me a job description to be here. I need to be near Mom. I don't know exactly what the future holds. I still have an apartment there. I'm still assigned to Cameroon and hope to be back, but we'll see. We'll see what the Lord has. So.
How often are you dealing with some of the effects of war as far as patients, gunshot victims and that kind of thing?
She asked about how often do we have to deal with gunshot wound victims and things like that, and it's certainly not every day, and even not every week, but it's several times a month gunshot wound victims come in, and so it's a real problem for the people. The people live in fear, and people have left their homes, and the public schools are closed, and it's a big problem. Yeah.
I have one other question. Last time when you were here, you had talked about Ebola quite a bit, and you had said that the hospital nearby had closed. I don't remember where exactly that was, but I was wondering if that solution, or if that had been resolved at all.
That was when I was in Liberia, and ELWA Hospital was where I worked, and ELWA was the only hospital that was able to stay open during the Ebola epidemic because of the preparation that we did. We prepared our staff and hardened our staff so they wouldn't get Ebola, but the other hospitals had to close. So that was a real problem for the people. They didn't have a place to go other than ELWA.
Have they opened now?
Oh yeah, that was back in 2014, 2015. So I believe most of those hospitals are open. Yeah. So.
How did COVID and the closures affect the ministry and the work of the hospital in Mabingo?
Well, they had to set aside one ward for COVID patients. There were deaths. It wasn't as bad as here. I think a lot of people just died out in the villages and never made it to the hospital. I'm not really sure. The hospital did its best to do protocols. There was a while we all wore masks and everything like that. We've tested every patient for COVID before we admitted them. And we had a special ward where we put them if they had COVID, but it seems to have died down quite a bit.
How long is your training program, and when do they start working on humans?
Okay, she asked how long the training program is, and when do they start working on humans. The training program is 5 years, and they start off. These are doctors; these are fully qualified doctors. So they start off when they're their first year, they're working with patients, and of course under supervision. I mean, we wouldn't send them to do a surgery without a senior person there. So they start working on patients right away. So.
Yes, I have a question for you. So your security, the soldier, that's from the local government or the government of Africa? Is that a federal or state?
the soldier that I showed was a Cameroonian soldier, and they were, when I was there, they were often on the compound. They would come on and off. It was, I don't think it was bad that they were there, but the trouble is then that made us a target for the rebels. And the gunfight that was 30 yards from my apartment, the soldiers were just walking past my apartment, going down to the market to get some food for lunch, and the rebels ambushed them right there. So having them on the compound made them a target, and people then risked us being in the crossfire.
So the charges against that one administrator, that was from the rebels?
No, that was from the military government.
What was he charged with?
I can't really, I can talk to you
sorry.
later about it if you like. Yeah. So,
Not on record.
yeah.
Any other questions? I don't want to miss a hand. Here we go.
These medical students, do they leave Africa to get that training and then come back? Like the one you mentioned, he's working at the same hospital he was born at. Like, where is their sort of, I guess, their undergrad and sort of like medical training happen?
They do their medical school wherever they can do their medical school. I mean, it's all in Africa. Like the young doctor that works at his hospital where he was born, he got his medical school in DR Congo. Then he was accepted by Mbingo for his residency and came to Mbingo and did his 5-year residency and went back to DRC. So most of our residents are Cameroonian. Because of the Civil War, we're mainly taking Cameroonian residents right now because of the difficulty evacuating expatriates. So we'd take them from all over Africa, but not right now because of the war. So.
Your students, are they hearing the gospel for the first time, or is it a very churched area and program?
There are students. We don't call them students because they're fully qualified doctors. We call them, like we do here in the U.S., they're surgery residents, and they're all Christians, or they're supposed to be. I mean, they have to have a credible Christian testimony. They have to be, basically, we interview them like we would for potential missionaries, because that's what they're going to be. And so they do some of them slip through and maybe they're not believers. That occasionally happens, but for the most part, I mean, these are committed Christians who want to serve the Lord. Our patients now, on the other hand, or the hospital staff may not be believers, but our residents certainly are, surgery residents certainly are believers, or they're supposed to be anyway. So. Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Debbie, for presenting today. That was really fascinating.